Okay, the meeting is live on YouTube. You could get started.
Thank you very much. I hereby call this meeting to order. This is the Ad Hoc Committee of the City Council in regards to Flintlock Drive petition for city acceptance of private road. This is item number 4 from our March 2nd City Council meeting. The record, the time is 7:13, and those in attendance, myself, Irving Fox, Chair of the committee. We have committee members Michael Esposito and Mr. Robert Tabersack. We have Corporation Counsel Pinter. We have Mr. Iadrola, City Engineer. We have the tax assessor. Is that you, Donna? We've got ex officio members of the City Council to the committee. We have Mr. Levy. We have Councilman Santos, and we have Councilman DiGilio, Councilman Priola, and Councilman Rotello. And I think that's everybody. Thank you very much for attending this evening. Sorry, we have Councilman
Mike Henry.
Mike Henry. Congrats. And Taylor O'Brien is also on as well. The purpose of this meeting is to consider the petition for the city acceptance of the portion of Flintlock Drive that's currently a private road. Maybe we can get some background from Mr. Iadrola, just in terms of what the request is, and then we can kind of continue. So Mr. Iadrola, maybe you can describe the situation and where we're currently at.
Sure. I'll try to be quick. Some of council members that have probably been on the city's common council for a while have probably dealt with some of these types of requests. We do have not a lot of these roads in this condition, but there are probably more than we care to really wish that are left in this condition. But as a point of history, this extension of Flint Rock was due to a 6-lot subdivision that was done in the mid-'80s. And a developer went through the planning process. The subdivision was approved like any normal subdivision. The developer put together a small bond to assure that the public improvements, which consisted the construction of the extension, which terminated in a cul-de-sac, was done properly. And the developer was granted authority to construct the houses, which he did. He constructed the houses and sold them. As he was constructing the houses and selling them, the city did attempt several times to get the developer to finish the public improvements, which he or she promised to do, with no luck. This kept going on for a while, all the way up until, I think it was around 1988, when the engineering department made a final request after several time extensions to actually have the developer complete the improvements, which then he could petition the city to take on the road. It would become a public road, and everybody could move forward. The suspicion here is that the construction of the road was not done properly, and the developer knew there was extensive amount of work that was required in order to get the city to accept it, and basically froze in time to a certain degree. And as more time passed, the bond that was left was not sufficient to do any of the work and to complete the work. And pretty much this road has stayed in a unacceptable condition pretty much from 1988 to the current state. It is in rough condition. We do minimal amount of maintenance on it, and predominantly the maintenance is to really safeguard any ambulance, fire trucks that have to use the road to make sure they don't blow an axle, they don't blow a tire while they're performing emergency response activities. So that obviously doesn't constitute us taking over the maintenance, but that's a brief history of the road. I think the petition you have in front of you is a petition to possibly do a assessment project, which, as you know, we've done assessment projects for sewer and water, and we've done assessment projects for roads that ultimately were not accepted by the town, but need to be accepted. So that assessment project does get a little complicated. The first step is, as we directed the applicants, is to actually put a petition together for the council to review this and determine if they would allow the process to go through. So if that happens, we would try to develop some schematic drawings, do a final inspection, determine how much work is involved, and we would put together some preliminary estimates regarding what the potential assessment cost is to each property owner. So one very important note here is that one of the largest parcels that fronts this road, which is a parcel that would take, I would say, the brunt of the assessment, is actually a person that doesn't have a house on this property. It just abuts it's almost like an open land. It's part of his property, but it is a separate lot. So that's going to definitely complicate that issue with that property owner. But that's sort of where we stand. What complicates this? Let me tell you what complicates this for you guys. The road and the right-of-way was never, ever given to the city of Danbury. So really what you are doing here is, if you approve us moving forward on this project, is you would have to find some way to get whoever owns this, which we know the developer is no longer around. I think he's actually deceased and his estate has been terminated. We have no title to this property that the road sits on and the associated right-of-way. And if it was an abandoned road, everybody that abuts the road would have, I would say, ownership to the center of the road, and then everybody could collectively pull together and grant final ownership of the entire road to the city. But you're dealing with basically a missing developer, and this land is to some degree just floating out there with no ownership other than what was originally intended and what was originally held in the early 80s when the project was started. So that is a monumental issue to get over. I did talk to Les, our corporation counsel, and he agrees this requires some extensive research and nothing that we could do immediately. It would require going all the way back to the 80s, determining what happened to the estate, if there's anybody that's associated to the estate that would have the legal right to convey it, which doesn't seem to be the case based on the research that the engineering department did. So that is a major complication in an assessment project. Typically, assessment projects are, they move very quickly. Sewers, right? Sewers are always installed within a town road, a city-owned right-of-way, and those issues are very easily resolved. But the problem that we have here is that the ownership of this road is really in question, and the estate that probably had legal rights to the ownership has been really eliminated. It's no longer in effect. So that's, I apologize for the long drawn out summary, but I think it was important to try to put all of that in the table. And trust me, I could talk for about another 2 hours about the history of this road.
Thank you, Mr. Drola. I think based on the latter part of what you said, I think it would be appropriate just to turn it over to Corporation Counsel to talk about some of the legal issues that exist, if, how to determine if that piece has been abandoned or if the estate needs to get involved, maybe, and if that doesn't happen, what is the process to declare that abandoned? Maybe, Mr. Pinto, you could talk about some of the legal aspects of this.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to add on to what Antonio said, if both of us were to speak, we'd be here not for 2 hours, but probably 4. And we're probably stretching to the night. The way Antonio recounted the issue is exactly correct. There's the bottom line for the city or for the property owners and the petitioners to proceed on something like this. There are a number of quite complicated steps to take. Among the first would be the title issues. Who owns what? As far as the property owners are concerned, the abutting properties, Antonio mentioned the large parcel. There are a lot of questions about ownership of private rights in and around the subject area. So that's sort of a first issue to try to surround the questions of any deed of any rights, right-of-way issues, pure road ownership, and a lot of those costs and reviews would cycle back into the assessment costs because some of them could be quite significant and time consuming if a proper review is done, which we would want to do. As Antonio alluded at the beginning, a lot of the utilities assessment projects we've done, there have been more of those than road assessment projects. There is certainly a path to assessing property like this as the petitioners requested. But you'll see from the attached materials on the agenda, which came forward with Mr. Iadrola's letter back in February, there was outlined in the attachments some fairly extensive steps that would need to be taken as this proceeds. You're talking about the preliminary surveys, perhaps. You're talking about analysis of the property. You're talking about a first cut public hearing. You're talking about public comment. You're talking about a return to a full and final examination of costs and what the proper assessments might be, another public hearing, the establishment of final assessments, the filing of documents, and that's a short story. It's actually a lot longer than that. But in essence, a project like this would require quite a bit of labor and manpower on the part of the city. Our office, legal, and I know Antonio, it might be true for him too, depends on the circumstances. We would have to have some outside counsel retained to handle this, probably because of the level of private property inquiry and documentation that would probably have to either be produced or reviewed prior to effectuating any assessment. I should say, as a side note, and not often used, there's actually two possible paths to get to what the petitioners have sought. One is the process of special assessments for road acceptance, which Antonio talked about, and I spoke about a little bit with respect to the steps required. And by that, I mean the examination of title, the acquisition of necessary title, the determination of value, surveys, and things like that. And the reason I brought that up is, but Antonio mentioned early on that there was a bond in place, which bond is no longer in place, as I understand, or certainly is inadequate. There's another procedure that has very rarely been used, but could be available, where the petitioners and the city, in a coordinated effort and a sharing of costs, would take certain steps to improve the road to a certain level, which the city could then decide or not to accept. Now, in that circumstance, the road would not have to come up to city specifications. That's really not preferred, but that's a secondary path that's in our code of ordinances. It's possible. I just wanted to mention it as a side note. It's not usually preferred. It's not been used as far as I understand it. So, but that's in any case, that's not the path that the petitioners are seeking of the council. They're seeking the assessment path. And again, that takes a bit of doing and some steps, Mr. Chairman, in order to effectuate a final decision on that.
Thank you, Attorney Pinter. So maybe just, I want to circle back to Mr. Iadrola to just confirm one possible next step for this, if it's gone through the assessment path, is to authorize the mail survey into a cost estimate and a preliminary plan to be presented to the petitioners. I guess that would be the next logical step if this were to go along this path. Is that what would happen next? And then how do those cost estimates get generated, I guess, for consumption by the homeowners?
Mr. Chairman, I think what you're describing is the normal process in a case where ownership of the right-of-way has been determined and we move forward. But the process that you just described is an extensive amount of work and requires not only a full inspection, but a design of improvements, a cost evaluation of those improvements, the preparation of what is an assessment to the individual property owners. These tasks can easily take 6 to 8 months to do. As Wes mentioned to you, it's outrageously extensive amount of work that has to be done. To do that without determining the ownership of this road and how even an assessment could be done on property that is not owned by the interested parties, or that is not owned by even an individual that we can call or put our finger on and get some consensus that they would allow this to happen, I think is a really an incredible challenging use of assets at this point. So that I would urge you to just consider that before you would maybe direct the engineering department, the law department to move forward on this task. So I don't know exactly how to kind of move that forward, but it is an issue that, in my opinion, needs to be resolved first before you can even determine if an assessment project can be done. I think that is probably the most important thing to do. And, maybe I can work with Les and some outside counsel to lightly look at that issue without really, stressing out both departments, because I'm telling you, this is an extensive research. It is an extensive challenge of documentation, legal documentation, subdivision approvals, and so forth and so on, evaluation of individual titles for each of the property owners. It's huge. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I really would recommend that we lightly take a look at this ownership issue before we take this on as a real potential assessment project.
Thank you, Mr. Ajol. And I guess, Mr. Pinter, just as a follow-up, so the determination of that ownership issue, that's something, is that even feasible to get a cost estimate of what that would be before we even said, well, let's go ahead with even doing that? Is that something that can be estimatable, at least for the consumption of this committee and to the petitioners, to understand what that would entail, at least that legal aspect, which sounds like that has to get ironed out before anything else is done.
That's true, Mr. Chairman. We have a number of issues and questions that we really haven't been able to tend to yet, and Antonio summarized those very well. So in order to do that, we could take a look and examine some of the issues of concern that engineering has brought up, as well as issues that we would have. As far as the cost estimate, we certainly could bring outside counsel in and take a look at the big picture and make a determination of what is needed in terms of the title and the property reviews, and then consult with Antonio's department for the further steps required for that. How much that would cost, I'm not really sure. I can't give you a number, but we can certainly obtain a cost estimate to take that first step, to take a broad look at what we're facing, because we really haven't had a chance to do that yet. And not only because of the number of components involved in this, but because of the properties, the way they're situated down there.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we turn into other questions by the committee members, I would just want to give an opportunity for the petitioner to speak, just to give a flavor of what they're experiencing on Flintlock. Mr. Carvalho, I don't know if that's something you'd like to just address to the committee in terms of what you've experienced as a resident.
Yes. So I have several questions. These are posed by my neighbors. I'll just start with the first question. If the contractor was issued permits, you understand you're finishing the road, how were the CFOs issued with the road not being finished at the time the houses were done?
Mr. Chairman, I think I've answered, actually, my colleague, my coworker has answered a lot of these questions that were raised by somebody who spoke up at the last meeting. But if you want to spend the time, we can kind of go through them one more time. But there was an email chain that was actually sent that accurately communicates this. But I will explain that. And the explanation is simple. The city issued a CO with the guarantee from the developer that the road improvements would be done. That guarantee was backed by a bond. That developer defaulted on that guarantee. And as the record will show, try after try, multiple request after request, the city made to the developer, an extension after extension, to try to get the developer to actually do these improvements. He never did. He or she never did. So as you may gain ownership of your home and you close on a brand new home, the fact is that if you will, the guarantee that the developer gave every one of those people buying that home was in default. And that's really what happened here. So this is again something that at the time the developer really in a very unethical way performed and left everybody who bought homes on this road to struggle with.
Okay, and what happened to the bond? Now, I was told that was held by Union Trust. There was a $10,500 bond.
So there was a bond for 21,000. I believe you're right. It was reduced down to 10,000 and change. And part of our research would be what did happen to that bond. I really don't know. I couldn't answer that. It would require some extensive amount of work. But Mr. Carvalho, you do realize that we're talking a heck of a lot more than $10,000 worth of work here, right?
Oh, absolutely. No, I know that. Now, so the city has no record of who owns the road. I mean,
no, there is an estate that this is the research that our corporation counsel was talking about. It would require an extensive research of the individual as it existed as an entity, as maybe an LLC, as a corporation, and track that corporation and that dissolvement of that corporation to where it potentially is today. And that requires just an extensive amount of legal work to do that.
So I'll just pull back. So I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that we don't even know what the cost of that legal work is, much less the cost of improving the road for at least the homeowners to know, well, is this something I want to sign on for to pay for or not? So I don't even think the situation is at a point where we can, those estimates haven't even been developed yet. That still needs to be the whole issue of ownership of the road and what happened to the bond and what's left and whatnot, I think is part of kind of the estimating that has to happen before anyone can make a decision on, do we, you as the homeowner, do you want to pay for that or not? I don't even think.
I think it's something that has to be addressed because the road is deteriorating. I mean, we have a sewer on the circle that's sunken in. I was told even by our mail carrier that at one point years ago that one of the mail trucks actually had to get towed out because it got stuck. There's poor drainage. A lot of it that comes from, I believe, is the city portion of the road, which causes right at where the private road starts to sink in. Our neighbors, we have filled in a lot of the potholes, and I purchased this house in December of 2019, so I've been here roughly about a year and a half, and what I've seen in a year and a half is pretty scary. And my wife and I plan on being here a long time, and this road, especially with these winters, is not going to last. I mean, it's going to be hazardous. I mean, it really is. I mean, the dip at where the private road starts, I mean, if someone was to be driving fast enough, or God forbid, like a motorcycle went over that, I mean, it could cause, and I'm not trying to be extreme here, it could cause an accident. And it's really going to get in poor condition as the years go on. So I know, I'll speak for myself, it's something I want to get addressed and move forward with. And I understand it may take 6 to 8 months, but it can't just be left not taken care of, because it's just going to get worse.
Thank you for that. One question from Mr. Iadrola. Apart from the assessment process and making that a city street, do the homeowners have any other recourse? Just brainstorming. Can they kind of repair or repave the road kind of together? Would that be cheaper than bringing it up to city code? Are there other options for the homeowners versus going this route in order to get the road to a decent condition?
So it's interesting. I was actually just gonna kind of tell a little story about a similar situation that I encountered when I first started with the city of Danbury. A little different, but boy, it's got the same drivers on it. And very similar situation. Developer can't find who they are anymore. What happened to the actual LLC? If there was anybody that had rights to the estate, couldn't find any of that information. What we did there is we try to help all of the property owners that would benefit from the improvements to pull themselves together. I think the mayor at the time even offered to provide a little bit of legal guidance to establish a sort of a association, a homeowners association that would formally generate and pull together and would be able to levy some maintenance monies, almost like common charges, so the road could be maintained and could be upheld. We even went as far as to try to get some of our city contractors that we get incredible prices from, because we do so much work with them, to honor our city prices to do that initial work. I don't know whatever happened with that. I know the road did get some improvements, but it is something that is an option and could possibly work here. And Mr. Cavallo, the description of the condition out there, I just recently was on the road, is really a road that was never finished. The developer reaped the benefits by selling all these homes, reaped the profits, and never really put them back into one of the most primary requirements, which is providing the public access that you guys would need, and turned that over to the city so it would be maintained in perpetuality. So that is something that has happened before. Like I said, there is a little bit of a history, not only in Danbury, in a lot of communities where developers don't honor their commitment and move forward. The dip that you describe is directly caused by the fact that the road base has failed because final pavement was not put in. And really what you're getting is just a road base on the private portion of the road, which is causing that what is almost like a speed hump, a speed dip. But that, so Mr. Chairman, that's probably an option. And the reason why I say that's an option is if for some reason the original developer is out there, first of all, nobody is ever going to try to stop these folks from pulling their resources together and fixing this road so they can benefit from it. It's not like anybody's going to show up and say, hey, what are you guys doing fixing my property? Because clearly there's no developer here from the research we could find. And there's no legal, there's just no legal entity that took over those interests from what we can tell. So that's an option, and I'm sure I would donate my time as a, obviously through the mayor's office to allow us to work with these folks to investigate that option. It might be a much better option than to do and try to push the square peg through the round hole of a full assessment project, which has very definitive requirements. The first one being ownership. You got to be able to demonstrate title to this piece of property.
Thank you, Mr. Iadrola. I just want to open this up to just the other members of the committee for any questions they may have. on anything they've heard up to this point. So Mr. Esposito or Mr. Tabersack, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Fox,
Mr.
can you hear
Tabersack?
me?
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering, Mr. Carvalho, if they went on the path he wanted and you just, the ownership, I would take it would be a step-by-step assessment of what the cost would be. Would you need on the city ordinance, it would seem to me that you need all the petitioners to agree even on the cost for that. Am I right on this? I mean, it sounds to me like you wouldn't want to just jump into this until you find out the ownership if you're looking through the path.
Correct. Yeah,
saying.
absolutely. Yes.
Okay, and all the petitioners, would they be willing to, if whatever the cost of just looking
Well,
at it?
yeah, obviously we have to see what the cost
It
is,
would
yes.
seem to me the most logical thing is before you even dive into the whole thing is to find out if you can, what the ownership and what that be, because the cost, it looks to me like this would be some, going through all the way from what's been said, would be very high cost, and you have to get the agreement of everybody to do that. So it would seem to me to be no more prudent, just at least see what happens on the first step on the ownership. And then I think you see where you're at. And that would give you an idea, okay, should we go or should we do what was suggested about sort of a road improvement association for the group. I know you're in a tough position. It's, to me, originally there should have been some lawsuit or something against the contractor who originally built this, but that's long gone.
Yeah.
But
No,
that
we're
would have
open
been,
for options, yeah.
that would have been the thing to do at the time, was really to go after, not.
Well, unfortunately,
that's
a lot of us
gone.
purchased the homes afterwards, and we weren't told, myself and a lot of my neighbors I've spoken to, we were never told by our real estate agent or anybody that this was.
Or anybody. Okay, so it was passed along the line, just bypassed. Nobody said
Correct.
anything. Yeah, let's not bring it up like.
But we're
Okay,
open for any option. I mean, whether it's, any option that the city can present to us, we're open. Because it does have to be addressed. The roads just deteriorate.
No, I know. I drove it yesterday. I drove up to the cul-de-sac because, I want to see what it is. That's just what you said, that everything's, it's sinking and the potholes and all that, not in a precarious position. Okay, but I think, that's the whole project, it seems, I wouldn't, as a homeowner there, I wouldn't dive into the process until I found out if you can even answer the ownership question, to be honest.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Tabersack.
Thank you.
Mr. Esposito, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carvalho, can I ask you what number house do you live at?
30, last house on the street.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
You're down at the cul-de-sac?
Cul-de-sac, yep.
Okay. When I was up there today looking at it,
Yeah.
it seems like from house number 18 to the end of the cul-de-sac is where the major problem is.
Yes.
The ice just probably melted and there is like a little pond there in the middle of the road, plus the
Exactly.
potholes. When you go past 18 to get into the cul-de-sac, you're right. If you were going at any kind of speed, you're either going to lose control of your car or break something on the car
Yeah.
and wind up in the pond.
Yep.
There's definitely a drainage problem there. I could see that right off the bat.
Yeah.
Having had the opportunity in the last 5 years to drop off students there on that road, and when it's terrible weather, I used to go down there and turn around at the cul-de-sac, and believe me, it was not a fun time.
And Mike, the cul-de-sac was actually a lot worse. There was a crater there. So I just had my driveway last year. So I had my paver actually fill in
Yeah.
crater there, because otherwise it would literally be a pond there. The water would never evaporate. So he had some extra asphalt from an extra job, and he was not, now we had to pay him for it, of course, but he was able to fill it in to at least make it better than what it was. So if you looked at it, 6 months or a year ago, it would have even looked worse. It looked like
Yeah.
at the end.
Like I said, I've had the opportunity the last 5 years to drive that road, so I do know what it's like. Coming in on
It's beautiful.
Flintlock from Clapper
good.
Bridge is not a bad
road.
one.
Yeah, it's a good road,
But
yeah.
getting down towards the end, that's the terrible problem.
Yeah.
I concur with Mr. Adirola says that, we're gonna have to look at this, and with Attorney Les Pinter, we're gonna have to bring this back after they find out what's going on with the property. in the road.
Thank you.
You
Do any
Thank
other
you.
ex officio members have a question for anybody? Anyone, any of the other councilmen on the call?
Mr. Fox,
Mr. Rotella?
I'm not going to be voting on this anytime soon because I don't think it's coming to the council anytime soon. But just to get up to speed on this, it sounds like from what Corporation Council is saying and Mr. Iadarola is saying is that we have a private road of indeterminate ownership. The road is private. That's the operating assessment here. It's a private road. It's not a public road. The second part is the most unusual part. It's a private road that's not owned by the abutting homeowners. Lots of private roads in Danbury, and I mean, they're up the lake, they're all over the place, they're in the 6th Ward, they're private. I happen to live on a public road. It used to be private, it's public now. And I used to own right to the middle of it, but now that it's public, I technically still own the middle of it, but it's maintained by the city. But I'm wondering about standing. I mean, I have no right to request the city turn a road up at the lake from private to public if it's not my road. And it sounds to me like this is not the road that belongs to the adjacent property owners. And regardless of whether they're adjacent or not, I don't see a legal avenue that allows them to petition us to make somebody else's road private. Unless I'm mistaken, and unless you can take the floor after my questions. So that's the main issue to me, is not so much about determining ownership. The main issue to me is determining standing. I don't see somebody who doesn't own something asking the city to take it over. I've never even heard of something like that. So my suggestion would be that the homeowners who live adjacent to this parcel that they don't own do the research themselves and find out who owns it, make a deal if they can find out who owns it with the person who owns it, acquire it, and then come back to us as people of interest, because at that point they will own this parcel. Failing that, I don't see how we can go forward. I suppose by eminent domain or something like that, we could take this, but the risk, even doing that, is pretty high, because we would be taking something from someone we can't identify. So it's not really a question of the city doing the work to find out who owns it and then going forward from there. So to me, it's a question of, do the homeowners, the adjacent property owners, have standing to bring this to us? I'm not sure that they do. If that's the case, and I could be reading this completely wrong.
Yeah,
if they don't
Mr.
have
Pinto.
that, it seems to me it would be up to them to do the research to find out who owns it and then come back to us. That's my take on this, and I could be completely wrong. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
And
Mr.
again, this is
Pinto-
not coming in front of the
Mr.
council
Pinto, do you want
anytime
to?
soon. It's pretty complicated. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good, okay.
As I read the petitioner's request, the petitioners are seeking to use one of our code sections to come in and have the city upgrade the road and then be assessed for the improvement of the road, given the issues of title having been resolved. The standing issue hasn't come up in this particular case because it's not really an issue of legal standing. It's a matter of the city's willingness to condemn the road interests by whoever owns that, and then proceeding with the assessment project. That's come up in a couple of instances before. The city is always reluctant to condemn property unless we need to condemn it for a public purpose. Is there a public purpose here? You can argue that there is a public purpose here because city always wants to improve its roadways. That's what Antonio does every day in his department. So there is a path. If the assessment project is to proceed, we would determine the title issues, including the road issues. We would determine whether condemnation is the path to acquire the ownership of that property, and the cost of that would be assessed as part of the project. So it is possible to do that. I think the property owners have the right to use the section to seek a remedy for their roads and the upgrade and improvement of the roads. And so I think, but that all gets unbundled in the review process. And we would certainly, make recommendations coming back to the council that here's what we found, here's the title issues, here's what we recommend that you could do, and then you decide to do that. So that's my answer.
Okay, I mean, if I may through the chair, if you feel that the homeowners do have the ability to petition us, then that's fine with me. My only question was, I didn't understand how they could ask us to do something to somebody else's property. Thanks, Les. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I just want to mention for the record that the planning commission met on this on the 17th, and they did issue a positive recommendation. I think in the planning commission report, it was, this section was always intended to become a public road at some point. So I guess, Mr. Pinto, does that indicate public interest? That there is public interest in making this section at some point a city road. Mr. Pinto, I guess I just want to confirm that that's my correct understanding of that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. As far as the planning commission report?
Yeah, I just referred that the planning commission did give it a positive recommendation, and they commented that that section of road was intended to become a public road at some point. So just to reiterate what the public interest in this section of road.
Yes. I haven't seen that particular report, Mr. Chairman, but I assume that the commission would render a report with some conditions on it. And if the recommendation states conditions, I assume one of the conditions would be analyzing and obtaining the title status to the road, which would be the correct recommendation. Yes.
Okay, just want to turn it back to any other council people that have a question based on anything they've heard so far. No.
Mr. Cox, could I ask a question? One last question?
Sure, go ahead.
A couple of my neighbors oppose this. I mean, I think I know the answer to this, and I know this is a private road, but if the city maintains our road for emergency vehicles, emergency response, why can't they simply just patch up some of these giant, especially that dip? And I know that's the section where the private road begins, but I think a lot of our neighbors would just be happy, if we could just, at least, hot patch or whatever it is, fill in those potholes to avoid that dip. And a lot of that's caused by the city maintaining the plows. I mean, the end of the circle after this winter, the amount of asphalt from that at the end of the circle, I had to sweep up and pick up. My neighbors are just, that's from the plows. And we just don't understand why the city will patch up the rest of Flintlock and Clapboard Ridge, but they just can't put some hot patch or fill in that one section right there, which is the major issue.
I guess I would direct that, Mr. Iadrola, is that an issue of cost or an issue of?
No, it's not an issue of cost at all. It's an issue of taking public tax dollars and using them on private property. To some degree, it reflects no different than us going and doing a drainage job on somebody's private property.
I understand that, but sir, we pay taxes. I mean, where do our property taxes go?
Let me finish, sir. You are one of about probably 80 or 90 private roads out there that would immediately upon us starting to take practice in what you just described could petition the Common Council to do exactly what you're asking us to do. They also pay taxes. It's very unfortunate that it sounds like you might have been a little bit misled through the legal process of you acquiring your home, because the number one due diligence by any real estate agent, any attorney closing on your house, is to give you as much guidance, give you as much protection of exposure, and to legally determine whether or not a road is a town road or not, is that fundamental basic process. So it is unfortunate that
unfortunately, I'm not the only one, but here's the issue with that dip right there. In my opinion, and not just mine, a lot of my neighbors, the big reason for that dip is there is water flowing from the public side of that, from 16 or 18 Flintlock Drive, and it just flows there and it goes over a drain and it just settles there. And over years, the water is causing that dip. And that is coming from the public's part, that's coming from the city portion of the road.
Yeah, what you're actually seeing is a very well-built road butting up against a poorly built road. And you have failure at that connection point. That's what you're seeing. If you fix that point, it'll only move 2 or 3 feet down the road. It will just keep continuously moving down towards the cul-de-sac, because the base of the road, the pavement of the road, and the ability for that road to drain just isn't there. It just wasn't constructed correctly. So the remediation of that immediate connection between the private road and the city accepted road would just move down 2 or 3 feet from where we would remediate it. It's really an issue of taking the entire existing road base, which is part of the private road, and the pavement and the drainage, and remediate it so you have a solid, consistent base through the entire road. You have a good base on a public road, meeting a good base on what is now a private road, and you won't have that issue.
So, Mr. Adrol, I just want to, Taylor just informed me, so the Zoom meeting is going to cut off at 8 o'clock, but I would consider continuing this meeting subject to the call of the chair in order to give all the parties more time. It sounds like there's more information that we still need to gather before we can move it forward. So I guess, do I have a consensus from the committee to continue the meeting until we have more information? Mr. Esposito, is that?
I make that motion and we continue the meeting at further date.
Okay.
And I second it.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the meeting shall be continued. Thank you very much for attending. And this is an important issue, especially for the homeowners, which we need to kind of get to a resolution. But I'd like to thank everyone for attending.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
Good night,
you.
Mr. Cavallo.
Good
Thank you
night.
for your interest.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.